The shoebox was brown, and it lived on the top shelf of the closet in my old bedroom. Not my apartment, not the place David and I were building. My old bedroom, in the house where I grew up, where the wallpaper still had the faint water stain shaped like a rabbit, and the closet door still stuck in humid weather. I kept the box there because that was where it started, when I was 19 and didn't trust myself to keep money I could reach. I thought the safest place in the world was the house my parents kept. That was the first thing I was wrong about. Inside the box were years, folded ones from the diner, fives I'd smoothed flat against the kitchen counter, the tips I counted at midnight with my shoes off and my feet aching and the radio low so I wouldn't wake anyone. Later, when I left the diner and got a desk and a salary, I still added to it, a little every month, the way you feed something you love. By the spring I got engaged, that box held almost $11,000. 12 years of it. Enough for the wedding I'd been planning in my head since before I had anyone to marry. My parents took it without asking, without telling me. And when I found out, the reason they gave wasn't cruelty. It was something that sounded almost like virtue. Your sister needed it more. My name is Ruth Holloway, and this is the story of the wedding my parents weren't at, and the man who stood up so I didn't have to. Hi, I'm Martin. Sit with me for a bit. Tonight, we're going to spend some time with Ruth, a woman who saved for years in a shoebox, who found out exactly what her family thought she was worth, and who learned that the person who finally stood up for her wasn't anyone she was born to. Before we start, subscribe. It helps us grow the channel. Let's go. I should tell you about Tammy first, because you can't understand the box until you understand her. Tammy is my younger sister, 4 years younger. And from the time she was small, she was the one the light bent toward. I don't say that bitterly. I'm trying to be accurate. When you're the older child and a baby comes home, you learn quickly that the world has reorganized itself and that your new job is to be fine. I was good at being fine. I was so good at it that being fine became the only thing anyone ever expected of me. It showed up in small ways first, the way these things always do. Tammy got the new coat. I got the coat that still fit if I didn't zip it all the way. Tammy got the birthday party at the skating rink. I got told that money was tight that year, which it was, except it wasn't tight 2 years later when Tammy turned the same age. Nobody decided any of this in a single cruel moment. It accumulated, a grain at a time, until it was simply the shape of the family, the way a riverbed is the shape of where the water always goes. And the water always went to Tammy. When she failed a class, it was because the teacher didn't understand her. When I failed a class, which I did once in 10th grade, the year I was also working weekends, it was because I hadn't applied myself. When Tammy wanted something, my mother found a way. When I wanted something, my mother found a reason it could wait. I learned the reasons by heart. We'll see. Money's tight. You're old enough to understand. Your sister's still little. Here is the part I need you to believe, because it's the truth. For most of my life, I didn't mind. I told myself she was the baby, and the baby always gets coddled. That's just how families work. I watched my parents pour into her, and somewhere around the time I was 12, I made a quiet decision that I have only recently understood the cost of. I decided I would simply not be a person who needed pouring into. I would be the one who managed, the one who could be counted on, the one who never made anybody worry, because worry was a resource, like money and coats and birthday parties, and there was only ever enough for Tammy. It's a strange thing to be proud of, but I was proud of it. I wore my not needing like a badge. I thought it made me the strong one. It only made me the one they could take from. I want to be fair to my mother, because this story is easier if she's a monster, and she isn't one. That's the part that took me longest to make peace with. There was a winter when I was 10, and I got the flu badly enough to scare everyone, and my mother sat on the edge of my bed for 3 nights running, and she sang to me an old song off key, her hand cool on my forehead. I have carried that for 20 years. She was capable of it. The tenderness was real. That's what makes it complicated. It wasn't that she couldn't love me. It was that she decided, long before I could vote on it, what kind of love I required. And she'd settled on the kind that doesn't cost anything. A song when I was dying. Silence the rest of the time. She loved me the way you love a wall that holds up the house, gratefully, and without ever once thinking the wall might be tired. So when I started at the Riverside Diner the summer I turned 19, I didn't ask my parents for help with anything. I bought my own clothes. I paid for community college a class at a time, and I started saving, not for anything in particular at first, just for the feeling of holding something that was mine, that no one had handed me and no one could take back. The diner was the kind of place where the coffee was bottomless, and the regulars had assigned stools, without anyone ever assigning them. There was a man named Walt who came in at 6 every morning and took his coffee cream, no sugar, and a slice of rye he never finished. There was a woman the others called Miss Ada, who tipped in exact change, counted out of a coin purse, and who once told me I had a kind face and a hard one underneath it. And I've never forgotten that, because she was right, and I was 20, and I didn't know yet that both could be true. I learned to carry 4 plates on one arm. I learned which tables tipped and which ones smiled instead of tipping. I learned that if you remembered a man's order before he said it, he remembered you at Christmas. By my 2nd year, the cash was decent, and cash is a dangerous thing to keep in a wallet. So I bought a shoebox, the box my work shoes had come in, white sneakers with non-slip soles, and I started putting the tips in there. I kept it in my closet at my parents' house because I was still half living there then, and because hiding money in my own place felt like daring myself to spend it. At my parents', behind the winter sweaters, it was out of sight and out of reach. I'd come by on Sundays, slip the week's tips into the box, and feel the small private satisfaction of a number going up that only I knew about. Years passed like that. I moved into my own apartment. I got the desk job, marketing for a mid-size firm, and the money got steadier and the work got more interesting, and people there, strangers really, started to treat me like someone whose opinion was worth having. It was disorienting. I'd come home from a meeting where I'd been listened to and go to Sunday dinner where I'd be handed the dishes, and the whiplash of it took me years to even notice, because I'd been raised inside it and you don't notice the temperature of the water you were born in. But I never moved the box. By then it had become a kind of ritual. Sunday dinner at my parents', and afterward, quietly up the stairs to add to it. My mother thought I'd just like to sit in my old room sometimes. She never asked. It would never have occurred to her that her careful, capable daughter was keeping $11,000 on the other side of a stuck closet door. It would never have occurred to me that she'd look. David came into my life slowly, the way the best things do. We met through work. He was the accountant who caught an error in a vendor contract that would have cost the firm badly, and I was the one who'd flagged the vendor in the first place for unrelated reasons, and we ended up on the phone for an hour that had nothing to do with the contract by the end of it. He had a way of going quiet before he said something true, so that you leaned in for it. He made plans and kept them. When he said he'd call, he called, and I want to tell you how rare that felt, how almost suspicious it made me at first, that a person would simply do the thing they said they'd do. He was also, from very early on, quietly wary of my family. He never said anything unkind. That wasn't his way. But I watched him watch them. At the first Sunday dinner I brought him to, he saw my mother cut Tammy's steak into pieces. Tammy was 26, a grown woman with a fork in her hand, and then turned to me and asked me to clear the plates. He saw the conversation orbit Tammy's job and Tammy's apartment and Tammy's boyfriend, and touched down on my life only long enough to confirm that I was fine before lifting off again. He noticed that no one asked me a single question that required an answer longer than a word. On the drive home, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "They don't see you." "They see me," I said. "I'm just not the interesting one." He didn't argue. He reached over and held my hand at the stoplight, and I understood that he had filed something away in that careful mind of his, in the place where he kept the things that didn't add up. We were together 3 years before he proposed. No ring hidden in dessert, no crowd, no performance. We were on the couch on a Tuesday night, and he turned to me and said, "I think we should get married. I think we should build something that's just ours." And I said yes before he'd finished the sentence, because I had been ready for a long time, and because for the first time in my life, someone wanted to build something around me instead of past me. That night, I told him about the box. I drove to my parents', let myself in, said a quick hello, went up to my old room, and brought it down to show him at my own kitchen table. He opened it the way you'd open something that might be fragile. He looked at the folded ones, and the smooth flat fives, and the bank-banded 20s from the better years. "How long?" he asked. "Since I was 19, I said. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he closed the lid, very gently, and laid his hand flat on top of it, like he was making a promise to it. "We're going to give you the day you've been saving for," he said. I called my mother that Monday to tell her we were engaged. She cried. She said she was happy. She said all the right things, and I let myself believe them, because that's what you do with your mother. You keep extending the credit, long past the point where the account has earned it. I told her about the box. I wanted her to know I'd planned for this, that I wasn't asking anyone for anything, that I built it myself, one shift at a time, since I was 19 years old. I think, if I'm honest, I wanted more than that. I wanted her to be proud of me in the specific way she was always proud of Tammy. I wanted her to say, "Look what you did." I was 31, and I still wanted my mother to look at something I'd made and be amazed by it. I'm not too proud to tell you that. We don't outgrow that hunger. We just get better at hiding it. She said, "That's nice, honey. Now we should talk about the guest list." And we did. For 3 weeks, we talked about flowers and dates and whether Aunt Gloria should sit with the cousins or the aunts. My mother was warm and involved and exactly the mother I'd always wanted, and I didn't notice. I want to be honest about this. I didn't notice that not once in 3 weeks did she ask me where the box was, or how much was in it, or what I planned to do with it. She already knew. She'd known the second I told her. She was just deciding. I found out on a Thursday. I'd gone to my parents for dinner. David was working late, and afterward I went up to add the week's bit of savings, the way I always did, on autopilot, not even thinking about it. I opened the closet. I reached behind the sweaters. The box was there. It was just lighter. I knew before I opened it. You know the weight of a thing you've carried for years. I sat down on the edge of my old bed and lifted the lid. and there was nothing inside but the bare cardboard and a single rubber band that had dried out and snapped. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd been robbed. A stranger. A break-in. I sat there building the comforting story of a stranger, because a stranger would have been so much easier to survive. A stranger doesn't know your name. The stranger doesn't love you. I would rather have been robbed by a stranger than understand what I was about to understand. Then I heard my mother in the kitchen, laughing easily at something on the phone. And the comfortable story fell apart, because you don't laugh like that with a thief in the house. You only laugh like that when you've already decided you did nothing wrong. I came downstairs, holding the empty box. My mother saw it, and her face did something complicated. Not guilt, exactly. She set down the dish towel, and she said, in the gentle, reasonable voice she kept for difficult things, "Now, Ruth, before you get upset." "Where is it?" I said. My father was at the table with his coffee. He didn't look up. "We gave it to your sister," my mother said, "for the trip." Tammy, it turned out, was going to California. A week with 3 of her friends. They'd been planning it for months. Santa Monica, the beach, the pier, the whole bright thing. And Tammy couldn't cover her share, and the friends were going to go without her. And Tammy had cried about it at this very table, and my mother could not bear it. "She needed it more than a party, Ruth," my mother said. "You're sensible. You'll have other money. You always land on your feet. Your sister never gets anything for herself." I stood in the kitchen, holding the box I had filled $1 at a time since I was 19, and I asked the only question I could find. "You went into my room. You took my money, and you didn't think you needed to ask me first?" "It's family money," my mother said. "It's all family money in the end." I'm not going to pretend I was graceful. The skill I'd spent my life perfecting, being fine, deserted me completely, and I'm almost glad it did. I told her it wasn't family money, it was mine, every dollar of it, and that I could name the exact shift I'd worked for half of it. I told her they'd stolen from me. I used that word, stolen, and my mother flinched as though I'd thrown the box at her. My father finally looked up then, and what he said, I have never forgotten. "That's an ugly thing to say about your parents, after everything we've done for you." Everything they'd done for me. I stood there genuinely trying to assemble the list. I'd put myself through school. I bought my own car. I'd never once asked them for rent or a loan or a co-signed anything. The everything they'd done for me, as far as I could reconstruct it standing in that kitchen, was that they had allowed me to be the child who never needed a thing, and now they were presenting that arrangement as a generosity and informing me the bill had finally come due. "You're being selfish," my mother said. And honestly, Ruth, ungrateful. Your sister would never begrudge you a thing. Ungrateful. Selfish. The words came out of her so smoothly, so already worn, that I understood in an instant they weren't new. She had used them before. She had used them about me to other people before I ever walked down those stairs holding the empty box. She'd built the story before she took the money. In the story, I was the daughter with so much she wouldn't miss a little. I was the strong one, the fine one, the one who always lands on her feet. And the strong, fine one who lands on her feet does not get to be hurt. Being hurt wasn't in my job description. I'd written the job description myself at 12, and they'd held me to it for 19 years. I left without my coat. I remember that detail with a strange precision. I drove home in October without my coat, and I did not feel the cold at all the whole way. David was on the kitchen floor with me within the hour. I don't mean he sat in a chair and talked me through it from a comfortable distance. I mean he came home and found me sitting on the floor with my back against the cabinets and the empty box beside me, and he got down on the floor too, in his work clothes, on the cold tile, and he didn't say a single useless thing. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He didn't tell me maybe they meant well. He didn't reach for the explanation that would let everyone off the hook. He just sat with me, shoulder to shoulder, until the worst of it had passed through me, the way weather passes through a valley. Then he picked up the box, looked into the nothing inside it, and set it down again. "Okay," he said, "tell me what the wedding actually costs. Not the dream one, the real one." And then we did the thing I will love him for as long as I live. We built it back, that night, on the kitchen floor, with a legal pad and the calculator on his phone, and a bottle of wine we didn't end up opening. We cut the guest list from 110 down to 45. And the cutting felt less like loss than I expected. Half those names had been there to satisfy my mother anyway. We moved it out of the hotel ballroom I'd never really wanted, and into the back room of a restaurant we both loved, the one with the brick walls and the good warm light, and the owner who knew David by name. We cut the live band down to a good playlist, and Phyllis's nephew, who had a real speaker and a sense of when to turn it down. We cut the florist entirely, because my friend Margaret grew dahlias in her backyard, the deep red kind, and she'd been waiting years for an excuse. By midnight, we had a wedding that cost a third of what they'd taken. And somehow, I still can't fully explain this, it was more mine than the expensive one had ever been. Every line on that legal pad was a choice we'd made on purpose, together, with no one to perform for. Nobody had given it to us. Nobody could take it back. We were closer that night than we had ever been. There's a kind of bond that only forms when somebody watches you at your lowest, your ugliest, the version of you that swears in the kitchen and won't be comforted, and they don't look away, and they don't leave, and in the morning they're still there with the legal pad. The question of my parents came up 4 days later. We were addressing the invitations. 45 of them, in David's careful block printing, because my own handwriting had gone unreliable that week, my hands not quite steady. And we got to the bottom of the list, where I had written, automatically, the way you write your own name without deciding to, Mom and Dad. David set down his pen. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the two names sitting there at the bottom of the page. Then he stood up. I remember it exactly because of how unlike him it was. David is not a man who stands up to make a point. He's a man who stays in his chair and says the true thing quietly and lets it do its own work. But he got up from the table, and he stood there with his hands pushed into his pockets, and he said, "I have to say something. And I need you to hear all of it before you decide I'm wrong." I waited. "Your parents have spent your whole life treating you like the daughter who doesn't need anything," he said. "And you've spent your whole life proving them right, because being the one who doesn't need anything was the only way they'd love you. I've watched it for 3 years, Ruth. I watched your mother cut your sister's steak and then hand you the dishes. I watched a whole table forget to ask you a single question. And 4 days ago, they walked into your childhood bedroom and took $11,000 that you earned on your feet. And when you cried about it, they called you selfish in your own family's kitchen." "They're still my parents," I said. "It came out small. Smaller than I wanted." "They are," he said. "And if you want them there, They will be there, and I will shake your father's hand at our wedding, and I will mean it, because that's what you'll have asked of me. I'm not telling you what to do. I would never take this decision away from you." He paused, and his voice dropped into the quiet register I knew best. "But I am not going to sit at this table and write their names like nothing happened. They live 40 minutes away, and they could not be bothered to ask you one question before they emptied that box. I don't believe people who won't ask you a question have earned a seat in the front row of the day you saved 12 years for." That's the whole of it. He sat back down. He picked up his pen. He squared the next invitation in front of him. "It's your call," he said, not looking up. "It will always be your call. I just wasn't willing to be quiet about it this time." I looked at the two names at the bottom of the list for a long, long time. Mom and Dad in David's neat hand. Then I drew a line through them. It didn't feel like revenge. I need to be clear about that, because I know how it could sound. It didn't feel like getting even. It felt like the first time in my entire life that I had been given permission, not by them, by him, and then by myself, to decide that my own day mattered more than my mother's comfort. David didn't make the choice for me. He just stood up long enough for me to find the place where I was allowed to stand. That is the moment, if you want to know. That is when my fiancé stood up. Not in a ballroom, not in front of a crowd, not with a speech anyone applauded. At our own kitchen table, over a stack of invitations for an audience of one. It was the only standing up that ever mattered. We didn't call to announce it. That was the part I had to make my own peace with in the weeks after. We didn't phone them and declare them uninvited. We didn't send a cold little note. We simply did not invite them. The way you don't invite anyone you don't invite, by silence, by omission, by their name not being on an envelope. I told myself they might not even notice until it was over. I told myself a great many things in those weeks, lying awake while David slept, rehearsing arguments with people who weren't in the room. For 3 months I planned a wedding in the quiet. Margaret grew the dahlias, checking the buds against the calendar like a woman diffusing something. Phyllis from the book club asked, shyly, if she might do a reading, and practiced it so many times she had it by heart. David's mother, who is everything mine is not, curious and warm and genuinely interested in the small, true details of my actual life, took me dress shopping and cried in the good way when I stepped out of the fitting room, and asked the woman to take it in just here, and fussed, and I stood on that little carpeted platform and let myself be fussed over by a mother for the first time in my adult life, and I had to look at the ceiling to keep from crying myself. I kept waiting to feel the absence of my own mother in those rooms. I kept bracing for the grief of it. And what I felt instead, a little more each week, was something I was ashamed of at first, and then simply accepted. Relief. Relief that she wasn't there to find the one wrong thing about the dress. Relief that no one was keeping score. Relief that the day was going to be allowed to just be good. Tammy, by the way, went to California. She posted the photographs, the beach, the pier, the four of them laughing with the whole bright Pacific behind them. I looked at them exactly once. The trip my $11,000 had paid for looked like a very nice trip. The water was very blue. My sister looked happy in a way I almost recognized. I closed the app and I did not open it again for a long while. And I'm telling you that I looked at all because I promised you I wouldn't pretend to be better than I am. I looked. I felt it. Then I put it down. I didn't hate her. I want to say that plainly because it matters. She was 26, and she had been handed a thing, and she'd taken it the only way she had ever been taught to take things, without asking where it came from, because in our family, things had simply always arrived for Tammy, like weather, like the season changing. The fault was never really hers. The fault was the hand that did the giving, and the hand that did the giving had reached into my closet to do it. The wedding was in October, a year, almost to the week, from the night I found the empty box. It was perfect. I don't use that word loosely, and I'm not using it loosely now. The brick room glowed. Margaret's dahlias were the deep red of something that had come through a frost and decided to bloom anyway, and they sat in jars down the middle of the long tables. Phyllis read her poem, and her voice cracked on the last line, and not one person minded. If anything, the crack was the best part. David's hand was warm and steady in mine, and his voice did not shake once. And when he said he would choose me every single day, I believed him completely, because he had already proven it on a cold kitchen floor when I was at my worst. 45 people came. Every single one of them was someone who had chosen to be in my life and chosen me back. There was no one in that room performing an affection they didn't feel. There was no one keeping a ledger. I had spent so many years at family gatherings quietly managing the temperature of the room, heading off the comment, smoothing the moment, making sure everyone but me was comfortable, that when I found myself on the small dance floor during the first dance, it took me a long moment to identify the strange sensation moving through me. I wasn't managing anything. No one needed me to be fine. I was just happy. The feeling was so unfamiliar that I had to stop and name it like a word in another language. My parents were not there. And I'll tell you the truth, because I promised you the truth from the start. I didn't feel the hole I'd spent 3 months bracing for. I'd braced for grief, and what arrived instead was peace. Their absence wasn't a wound that day. It was just quiet. The good kind of quiet. The kind I'd apparently been buying, one folded dollar at a time, for 12 years, without ever knowing that was what I was really saving for. They found out 11 days later. I don't know exactly how. Dunmore is a small enough town, and somebody always tells. Aunt Gloria probably, or one of the cousins who'd been there. All I know is that on a Tuesday evening my phone lit up with my mother's name, and when I answered, her voice was not gentle and reasonable anymore. "We had to hear from Carol Pemberton that you got married," she said. "Married, Ruth. A whole wedding. And your own parents weren't told. Weren't there. Do you have any idea how that made us look? In front of everyone?" There it was. Not how could you. Not are you all right. Not in any form, I'm sorry. The first and only thing she could find, 11 days after I'd married the man I loved, was how it had made her look. The silence on the line had a texture I had never once heard from my mother in 31 years. She had genuinely not considered it possible that the daughter who was always fine, always sensible, always there to clear the plates and smooth the moment, could simply decline to invite her. It had never entered the realm of things that could happen, like the sun coming up in the west. "We're your parents," she said, finally, as though that were the argument, as though it had ever once been the argument. And then, after a lifetime of being fine, I told her everything. I didn't yell. I want you to know that. I'd imagined this conversation 100 times across the years, not this exact one, but its cousins. And in every imagined version, I was screaming, finally, after all of it. But when the real one came, it didn't come out as a scream. It came out level and slow and almost tired, because I had been carrying the weight of it for so long that setting it down didn't take any force at all. It just took finally being willing to set it down. I told her I had been saving since I was 19 years old, that every dollar in that box was a shift on my feet, a Christmas I'd worked, a regular's order I'd memorized, a month I'd kept the old car instead of the new one. I told her I had kept that box in their house, of all the places in the world, because I had believed, like a child, like the child I apparently still was where they were concerned, that their house was the safest place there could be, and that they had reached into the safest place in the world and taken it, and not even granted me the basic decency of a question first. I told her I had been the daughter who never needed anything for 31 years, and that I had done it on purpose, because being the one who didn't need anything was the only version of me she'd ever seemed able to love. I told her that Tammy had gotten the bigger slice my entire life, and that I had never once complained, not at the skating rink, not over the coat, not at any of the 1,000 small tables where the water ran toward my sister, and that the difference between Tammy and me had never been that Tammy needed more. It was that Tammy had been taught to ask, and I had been taught to manage, and then they had punished me, called me selfish, called me ungrateful for the very thing they had spent 18 years training me to be. You went into my room, I said. You took $11,000 I earned, and you called me ungrateful for noticing it was gone. So no, Mom, you weren't invited. And if I had it to do over, I'd do it exactly the same. She started to cry. The old me, the fine one, the sensible one, the one who managed the temperature of every room, would have softened the moment I heard it, would have rushed in with something to make it stop, to make it better, to take the discomfort off her and load it back onto myself where everyone agreed it belonged. I felt the old reflex rise up in me, strong as ever, the lifelong pull to fix her feeling for her. And I didn't do it. I let her cry. I didn't rush to fill the silence, because some silences belong, at long last, to the person who finally stopped explaining herself. I have to go, I said after a while. David's home. And I hung up. That was the last real conversation I had with my mother. It's been a while now. We don't talk. There was no dramatic severing, no final letter laid down like a verdict, just the slow settling of a distance that I have come to understand was always there underneath everything. I had spent 31 years pulling against it, working to close a gap my parents were always, quietly, without malice, widening from their side. When I finally stopped pulling, the distance simply became what it had always been. The rope went slack. That was all. I'm not in pain about it most days. That surprises people when I say it out loud. They expect a story like this one to end with me hollowed out, undone by the loss of my family, lighting a candle for what might have been. But you cannot lose what you never quite had. What I had was a job, keeping the peace, being fine, managing the room, and I quit the job, and the relief of finally setting it down has outlasted the grief of what it cost me to pick it up in the first place. David and I are well. We bought a small house with a yard, the kind of yard where you stand at the window and imagine things into it. A swing, a garden. A child, someday, running the length of it in the long light of a summer evening. He still says exactly what he means. He still calls when he says he'll call. I married the right man, and I knew it for certain not on our wedding day, but on an ordinary Tuesday at a kitchen table when he stood up over a stack of invitations and crossed a line I had been far too well trained to cross by myself. Tammy and I text sometimes. It isn't much. A birthday, A funny thing she saw that reminded her of me. A photo of a dog. She's doing well these days. She finished a program. She has a job she actually likes. She's steadier than she used to be, like someone who finally stopped waiting to be rescued and learned the ground holds you up if you let it. We have never once talked about the money, not directly. But I think she knows. I think the careful not talking about it is its own kind of apology, the only kind she has in her. And I have decided that for now, it's enough. She was a child of that house too, in her own way. She just got handed the part of it that looks like love from the outside, and I'm not sure, in the end, that hers was the better inheritance. Dot, I don't know whether my parents and I will ever speak again. Some days I think the door is shut for good, and I'm at peace with that. Other days I think doors are almost never as shut as we tell ourselves they are. I've stopped trying to predict it. I spent enough of my life managing the weather of other people's feelings. I'm not going to spend what's left of it forecasting a reunion that may simply never come, and rearranging myself in advance to be ready for it. But I did do one thing. 2 weeks ago, I found out I'm pregnant. A girl. We're going to name her Sophia. I sat with that for a few days, the sheer strangeness of making a whole person, and the fierce thing that arrived in me the moment I saw her on the screen, a feeling I had no training for and didn't need any. And then I did something I still can't entirely explain to myself. I bought a small card, the kind with a single pressed flower on the front, and I wrote in my own hand, "We're expecting a girl in the spring. Her name will be Sophia." And I addressed it to my parents' house, the house with the rabbit-shaped stain on the wallpaper and the closet door that sticks. And I walked it down to the mailbox myself, and I put it in and lifted the little red flag before I could let myself reconsider. I didn't send it because I've forgiven them. I haven't, not yet, maybe not ever. I've stopped making promises about that to myself or anyone. I didn't send it because I want them at the hospital, or the christening, or the birthday parties with the cake. I sent it because I am about to raise a daughter of my own, and I never again want to be a woman who keeps the things that matter most in a box in the dark, on a high shelf, behind the sweaters, hoping that someone will finally think to look. I would rather say the true thing out loud, into the silence, and let it land wherever it's going to land. I don't know how they took it. I don't know if my mother cried, or if my father set it down on the table without a word and went back to his coffee, or if the two of them have already begun, together, to compose the version of the story where this card, too, is something cruel that I did to them. I will very likely never know. The card was the last dollar I had left to put in the box, and now the box is empty in the way that means free instead of the way that meant robbed. Maybe they'll write back. Maybe they won't. Maybe Sophia will know them a little someday, or not at all. And either way, she is going to grow up in a house where nobody has to earn love by needing nothing. Here's what I know. I'm sitting in the yard where the swing is going to go, with my hand resting on a stomach that's only just begun to change. And the man who stood up for me at a kitchen table is inside making far more noise than one person should be able to make cooking a single dinner. I saved for a wedding for 12 years, and they took it in a single afternoon. And I still ended up with more than that box ever held. I have the day I built, instead of the one I only dreamed. I have a name picked out for a girl who is never going to have to wonder where she stands. And I have, at long last, the thing it turns out I was really saving for the whole time, which was never the wedding at all. It was this: a quiet house in the good way, and the right people in it. It was more than enough.